Language is the foundation of civilization. It is the glue that holds a people together. It is the first weapon drawn in a conflict. The year is 2016. An emergency news broadcast comes on the TV announcing the arrival of 12 ships, visitors from beyond the stars, and we have to learn through linguistics what they are here for and why. Welcome to Easily Entertained. I'm Bryson Olson, here to talk about all things entertainment. Arrival is incredibly high up on my list of movies as it deals a lot with language, in particular kind of bridging the language gap. And as someone who is bilingual and has grown up bilingual, I just find it really fascinating to talk about language. I just think it's cool. And there are three main concepts that the movie dives into that I want to talk about, starting with symbols of meaning. Writing is incredibly important to any language. It allows for ideas to be visible and permanent. And for most human languages, they represent sounds for the spoken language. One exception kind of being sign language, as like in American Sign Language in particular, they use English to write, but there is a written form of ASL. There are several, like Stokey notation and ASL write, but these are more used to represent movements rather than sounds, obviously given the nature of the language. In Arrival, this new written alien language known as Heptapod B does not represent sound. It doesn't represent Heptapod A, which is the sounds the aliens make, which kind of sound like whales singing. But it does still convey meaning with Heptapod B. With such a drastic difference in vocalization between humans and the heptapods, you need a written language. We are not physically capable of producing the same kinds of sounds that they do. Otherwise, it's kind of like humans trying to communicate with whales. We can still collect their sounds, but we can't hear the full frequencies that they are emitting. The way the sounds are created are just way too different to the way that we create sounds, making the bridge a bit harder. They are trying to do that in the modern world, which I think is really cool. However, it is a harder challenge to proceed. In real life, this technique of using written language is often used when trying to communicate between different languages, using symbols and writing to find common terms and allowing for these terms to be the basis of understanding. You have to have a point on where you're going to start. For example, I, as an English speaker and an ASL signer, I don't understand Japanese, but if I was given a symbol for terms and objects that I understand over and over again, eventually my brain will associate those patterns and remember how they link over time. And then it will become easier and easier to eventually connect with things. And when learning further concepts, that's how it works in language. It becomes easier as you get the base terms. You have an area in which you already understand and can continue to move forward. The pieces fall further into place like a big puzzle. And in Arrival, the language is even more complicated, as the way they write is by using non-linear orthography, which is, so the way human writing is linear. It's a linear orthography. We have symbols that convey meaning or sounds, and they are usually written in some kind of line format, making them linear. It's straightforward. But pairing with the way the heptapods perceive time, their writing is non-linear. They don't perceive time in the same way that we do. It reads the same forwards and backwards in a circular fashion. And it's these different kinds of writing, especially without any roots that the human languages have, makes understanding context incredibly difficult. So that's what we'll talk about next, is context of language. Context means a lot in language. One word can have multiple meanings, or there can be many different ways to say one thing, such as the word like. Like can mean you enjoy something, saying I like doing this video, or it can mean something as in referring to similar. The wall behind me is white like my skin, meaning they're the same. And this is a very big example that you can use in like ASL, as well as the two different contexts actually have two different signs. One being for the enjoyment, whereas one is meaning for similar. Many languages follow this similar kind of pattern of having different words for different contexts. And, English is just weird. We use a lot of words in the same context for a lot of different things, so we can have a vast understanding with only a few words, which is kind of interesting, but we're also weird because we're I think one of the only languages that does that. I don't know, I'm not a full linguist, but English, we're kind of weird. But when the fate of the world is at hand and you are determining if an alien species is either here to bring war or assistance or whatever, it's kind of important to know the difference between those terms. During a very pivotal point in Arrival, the aliens say that they are here to bring, to give weapon. This causes everybody to freak out, naturally, because they don't know what the context means. A weapon to what? To use on each other? To use on something else? Is there something coming? Is a weapon or is it a tool? What does that mean? Context matters for both sides. In the movie, the Chinese government, for example, is communicating to the aliens with Mahjong, which outside of the movie, in context, is actually incredibly interesting, because the way the aliens think is nonlinear. They are not, taking turns or whatever. They're kind of thinking of everything all at once. And that's kind of how you play Mahjong. And that is actually an interesting way to have an effective form of communication. However, in the context of the movie and the Americans in the movie, that makes it seem like every conversation, every interaction between aliens and humans is a game. Which could turn into something worse. A move in a game could be taken to be seen as an act of war. So that's not very good. So what is the context for give weapon for the aliens? Because their context could also be different. Do they see weapons as something else? Context is just incredibly important. And it takes a lot for the characters in this movie to understand what context is, and they have to work up to it. You have to build it over time, understanding what different things mean. It's like a child. They don't always know the context of what something means, or like when they're learning to read. They don't know the context of the way certain letters are put together. GH can make a F sound, but in Ghost, it doesn't. They don't understand the context yet, and they have to build up to it. It's like teaching a child. And in the movie, it's kind of interesting the way they make the script, because they set the goal in the beginning, and I think it's pretty clever, because usually the rule is show, don't tell. You want to show characters doing something rather than telling us how they are feeling or how they are doing something. And in this, they set a goal. We have to ask this question: what is your purpose here? And the story goes from there. And it's a very clever way to kind of get around that rule, because they're basically saying, hey, this is where the story is going, and this is what you're going to be watching. But they don't flat out say it. It is more in context. See? Context, guys. That's the key between these characters. And Louise, the main character, kind of breaks it down, saying that we need to determine and understand the context of every part of the sentence and how to explain it to the heptapods so they understand the context as well. How do they ask a question? How do they have a preposition, a subject? How is it the your as in the species rather than the singular your? Here meaning earth, purpose is another concept that they have to determine. There's a whole bunch of steps that they have to get there. And they have to make sure they understand the context of every single part. And the only way for them and the aliens to fully understand context is to live in the language, which brings us to full immersion. A common tactic to learn a new language, which is often used in like classrooms or if someone is visiting a foreign country, is through immersion. It is essentially forcing you to learn the new language without another language to fall back on. So say I didn't know ASL. If I needed to learn ASL, taking out English entirely is the way to do it. I took ASL classes in high school as well. I've grown up bilingual with ASL, so it's a different context for me. But in the classes, the way for the people that don't know ASL is through immersion. They cut out English and use sign, and you basically have to just do it. You have to just learn, and that is how you have to go through it. Basically, like your life depends on it. And if in the case of Arrival, your life does depend on it, you will learn the language so that you can make it out alive. And in Arrival, they end up taking it a bit fast more near the end, but for most of the movie, it is pretty understandable. As the characters are learning more about the heptapod language, they are thinking about it constantly. They're thinking, okay, these symbols mean this means this, and all these different aspects of it. More things start to make sense to them, and the easier it is to understand the new symbols that come up. They can make the connections a little bit easier. And they are getting immersed in the language. However, they can only do it for 2 hours at a time, and then for 18 hours, the ship kind of has to flush things out so that it can bring in the atmosphere. And they are kind of left, and the humans are left to their own devices to try and solve the puzzle while they're in their own native language, which is helpful and it's not. This allows them to fall back on that language and communicate with other members of the team to formulate new ideas, to try and figure out what things mean. But at the same time, this hinders the full understanding of the language as they are using English concepts to connect with what the heptapods write, which is obviously not English. There's probably not going to be a one-to-one translation. When the aliens announce that they are there to give weapon, this puts them in essentially a life or death situation. Now the stakes are so high. They need to take everything they've learned and really understand the language and figure out what give weapon means. They have to put all the pieces together, and it eventually ends up where they receive the entire language of Heptapod B as the weapon, and then they are given all the symbols. However, something goes wrong, so they can't really take the time to learn all the context. So they don't fully know what all these symbols mean. Some of them are similar to the ones they have been given, but most of them are new. When this happens, Louise starts to eventually connect the dots, and she becomes immersed within the language. She starts to think in the language, and she perceives time the same way they do, in a non-linear way. She can remember not only the past, but future events that she is a part of as well. And it's kind of interesting the way they tell it with the editing, kind of as if she has always had this, but we are essentially seeing the movie almost as like a recalling event, as she is remembering events throughout the movie. So we are assuming that it's kind of a linear timeline and she's remembering events. So we're seeing it all from Louisa's perspective. But anyways, during this time, governments are silent and potentially about to go to war with each other. And in order to figure out how to stop all this, Louise has to use her new immersion in the heptapod language to allow herself to stop the coming conflict. She learns about how time is affected understanding the language. She has to reach into her future memories to remember a conversation in order to stop a coming war. And it's just interesting. While the circular time aspect is not as like scientifically accurate, just because we don't have any real basis for that in the real world, so we don't know if that's actually true, the rest of the way they learn language in this, those kind of aspects, are pretty accurate. That's how you learn and teach a new language, through all these ways. They use a ways of visual communication in order to best find similar meaning and concepts both parties understand. They describe what it means to gain context within these languages and, figure out what is a basis and move on from there. And they show what it can be like to become fully immersed in a language and to truly understand that language, to know what they mean, not to just make connections with an existing language, but to understand the language. And these are all real ways that real linguists, I can't say that word for some reason, connect and translate new languages, and can be how you may learn a language yourself. The whole world thrives on communication. It's how we connect. It's how we feel. It's how we share. And this is why Arrival is so good. It's because it takes its time to show us the importance of language. So now let's move on to our rating of Arrival. And it's not going to be a surprise of what we're giving our rating. But before we say that, our rating scale, if you don't know, from least to worst is garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, an all day, every day. And Arrival is clearly an all day, every day. Not only is the concept of language super interesting, the story is well written. They have incredible lines that like kind of make you think. They're kind of like philosophical in that way. The editing and CGI is really good. It's just all amazing. So it's definitely an all day, every day kind of movie. It is pretty great. And now let's move on to our question of the week, a question designed to get you interested in the conversation about this week's topic. And since we're talking about languages with this movie, this is kind of a two-parter question. What languages do you know? And what languages would you like to learn? I have grown up knowing both English and sign language. I say ASL sometimes, but that's not technically accurate because my grammar of ASL is kind of bad. I use a lot more English grammar because that's kind of how my dad signs, because he's deaf, so I always have known sign language. But I would also like to learn quite a few languages. At one point, I knew a very small bit of German because I took a few classes in middle school, but I did not continue that. So I think it would be cool to learn that again. Spanish, I think, would be great. I think especially in the United States because we have a lot of Spanish speakers here. And I think a different kind of language like that uses more symbols like Chinese or Japanese, I think would be interesting. I know there are different kinds of Chinese. I know Mandarin, I think, is the most common one. That I would be interested in learning. Or the other one, I don't know. But Japanese, I also think would be cool because I think it would be cool to visit Japan one day and actually be able to get around without asking people, even though like that's not a very uncommon thing to have to do. But anyways, what languages do you know and what languages would you like to know? And leave that in the comments down below. And that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, give us a like, give us a follow so you can be updated on all the latest episodes of Easily Entertained. And, until next time, bye.